各位傳媒朋友，
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's press briefing by the Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. This is about the Public Officers Candidacy and Taking Up Offices Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2021. We have with us Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Mr. Eric Zhang, Permanent Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Mr. Roy Tang, and Deputy Law Draftsman of the Department of Justice, Mr. Lawrence Pang. We will now defer to Mr. Zhang to take us through the bill. Friends from the media, Hong Kong people, good afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to report the progress of our legislative work to amend the requirements to ask public officers to take the oath, as well as our legislative amendment on the Public Offices Bill. Article 104 of the Basic Law provides that when assuming office, the Chief Executive, principal officials, members of the Exco and the Legco, judges of the courts at all levels, and other members of the judiciary in the Hong Kong SAR must, in accordance with the law, swear to uphold the basic law of the Hong Kong SAR of the PRC and swear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR of the PRC. As a result of oath-taking saga in 2016 by Legco members, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, NPCSC, adopted the interpretation on the 7th of November 2016 on the basis of Article 67(4) of the Constitution of the PRC and Article 158(1) of the Basic Law. The interpretation explains that oath-taking is the legal prerequisite and required procedure for public officers specified in Article 104 of the Basic Law to assume office, and must comply with the legal requirements in respect of its form and content. The interpretation also makes it clear that an oath-taker who makes a false oath or who, after taking the oath, engages in conduct in breach of the oath shall bear legal responsibility in accordance with the law. In addition, the National Security Law promulgated on the 30th of June 2020 also stated clear requirements on oath-taking. Article 6 stipulates that a resident of the Hong Kong SAR who stands for election or assumes public office shall confirm in writing or take an oath to uphold the basic law and swear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR. On the 11th of November 2020, the NPCSC made the decision on issues relating to the qualification of the members of the Legislative Council, expressly stating that a Legco member does not fulfill the legal requirements and conditions on upholding the basic law and bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR of the PRC if the member advocates or supports Hong Kong independence, refuses to recognize the PRC sovereignty over Hong Kong and the exercise of the sovereignty, solicits intervention by foreign or external forces in Hong Kong SAR affairs, or carries out other acts that endanger national security. When the member is so decided in accordance with the law, he or she is immediately disqualified as a Legco member. In light of the promulgation of these laws and decisions, we propose to make amendments to local legislation such as the Oath and Declaration Ordinance to implement the relevant requirements on oath-taking by public officers, as well as statutory procedures and legal consequences for any breach of the oath. I will now give you information of the bill endorsed by CE in Council. There are 6 major areas in the bill. First, there will be clear explanation of the meaning of a reference to uphold the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR. 2, to introduce requirements for district council members to take oath. 3, to stipulate clearly oath-taking requirements, as well as consequence of any refusal or neglect to take the oath. 4. To standardize the arrangements of oath administrators. 5. To amend the Legislative Council Ordinance and the District Council Ordinance to stipulate that any breach of the oath or in compliance with the requirement to uphold the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, the person will be disqualified from office. 6. To introduce restrictions in the elections of the Chief Executive, Legislative and District Council, that anyone who has been disqualified for breach of an oath or fail to fulfill any requirements and conditions on upholding the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, they should be barred from standing for relevant elections held within 5 years. I'm now going to go into details of these main points. In relation to the reference of upholding the basic law and bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, we propose to amend the Interpretation and General Clauses Ordinance to explain the meaning of what constitute upholding the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, to make it clearer. In short, if a person satisfy the positive list, that means the person upholds the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR. And if the person does or intends to do any of the things set out in a negative list, that means that person does not uphold the basic law or bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR. There are 6 items under the positive list. First, uphold the constitutional order of the Hong Kong SAR established by the Constitution of the PRC and the Basic Law. B. Uphold the national sovereignty, unity, territorial integrity, and national security of the PRC. C. Upholds the fact that Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of the PRC. The PRC's exercise of sovereignty over the Hong Kong SAR and the central authority's exercise of governance over the Hong Kong SAR under the Basic Law. D. Upholds the implementation of one country, two systems principle and safeguards the political structure of the Hong Kong SAR. E. Uphold the objective to maintain the prosperity and stability of the Hong Kong SAR within the framework of the Basic Law. And F. Is loyal to and safeguards the interests of the Hong Kong SAR.
The acts covered by the negative list include committing acts or carries out activities that endanger national security, refuse to admit that the PRC sovereignty over the SAR and the exercise of the sovereignty. And C, refuses to recognize the constitutional status of the SAR as a local administrative region of the PRC, advocates or supports Hong Kong independence, including the pursuing, promoting and implementing independence and state building of Hong Kong, and so on. According to Article 6 of the National Security Law, residents of Hong Kong in participating in election or taking up public office should sign relevant documents or take an oath to swear allegiance to the Basic Law and bear allegiance to the SAR. Supporting the Basic Law and bearing allegiance to the SAR is the responsibility of the District Council members. That's why we've incorporated District Councillors into the amendment. We will propose to amend the Oath and Declaration Ordinance to incorporate that requirement. And the oath-taking requirements for District Councillors will be the same as the requirements for other public officers as covered by Article 104, and they should immediately take the oath upon election. With the passage of the bill, the Home Affairs Bureau will arrange for District Councillors to take the oath as soon as possible. Make reference of the interpretation by the NPCSC in November 2016. We've already amended the Oath and Declaration Ordinance to put in place the specific requirements for oath-taking. Persons who are required to take the oath, if they deliberately, breaches the requirements or deliberately distorts the wording or fails to solemnly and take the oath, will be regarded as refusing or unable to take the oath and therefore will be disqualified. At the moment, the Oath and Declaration Ordinance stipulates prescribe for different persons to be the oath taker for public officers. In view of the fact that the oath taker plays a very important role, we propose that it should be for the CE to be the oath taker for EXCO members, Legislative Council members, district councillors, judges at all levels of courts, and other public officers. We suggest that we should provide for flexibility so that the CE may authorize appropriate persons to be the oath taker on her behalf. The MPC SE interpretation stipulates that an oath taker who takes a false oath or breaches the requirements of the oath after the oath is taken is an offense, and already the crimes ordinance can already cover offenses in respect of the making of a false oath. We will also need to amend the electoral ordinance and the district council ordinance to put in place provisions for sanctions or punishments for refusing to take the oath, and the grounds for such persons who breaches such requirements to lose their status as electoral councillors and district councillors. If the Secretary of Justice thinks that the person has really lost the qualification to be a council member, then she may, in accordance with the electoral ordinance or the district council ordinance, initiate proceedings and ask the court to declare that such a member has already lost his position. Once the SJ initiate procedures on that basis, the relevant members will automatically be suspended from office until the court has come up with a final decision. In order to expedite the legal proceedings, we've made reference of the existing, electoral petition arrangements under the existing electoral systems, and we provided for a fast-track arrangement so that anyone who feels aggrieved by the decision of the Court of First Instance can appeal directly to the CFA instead of appearing to the appeal court of the Supreme Court, in order we can come to a decision expeditiously. To reflect the solemnness of the taking of oath, we think that anyone who fails to comply with the requirements of the oath taken, there should be restrictions on their eligibility to stand for election. If anyone in the course of a C election, electoral election, or district council elections, if within the last 5 years had refused or neglected to take the oath and lost the qualification to become public officers, or have breached the oath, or did not satisfy the requirements for bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, then such a person would not be eligible to be nominated or be elected. In other words, if a person should be ruled to have refused or neglected to take the oath, or breaches the oath, will not be allowed to take part in the C election or the electoral or district council elections in the next 5 years. The proposed amendments to the law aims to accurately implement Article 104 of the Basic Law and the MPCSC's interpretation, and also the oath-taking requirements for other public officers, and to discharge the constitutional duties of the SAR government. We believe that the bill can help uphold the constitutional order of the SAR, and it's very important in ensuring that patriots will govern Hong Kong. The bill will, on the 26th of this month, be gazetted and will be tabled to LegCo in March to LegCo. Thank you very much. It's now Q&A time. Please tell us the organization you represent before you ask your question. Second row, the reporter who is wearing gray. Mr. Zhang, I'm from the Oriental Daily. 3 questions regarding the retrospectiveness of the proposals for LegCo and District Council members. After if they've now after the amendment of the ordinance, if they've no longer engaged in such acts which are prohibited, then will they still be disqualified? And people who are disqualified in the 2020 legislative election will 5 years. We start counting 5 years from then, and if a person is ruled to have been breached the requirements and the person will be suspended from duty, then how would what would be the arrangement in respect of the remuneration to be paid for such members? And finally, the pro-democratic camp actually attempted to hold a primary election, and it was accused of trying to subvert the government. They actually took more than half the seats in the district council elections. Have all those district councillors already been to have breached the law? What was the last question again? For district councillors, more than half of the seats were won by the pro-dem members. So would you say that those members have already breached the relevant laws and should be disqualified? Well, thank you for the question. First of all, regarding whether the proposed amendments will have a retrospective effect, I'm sure many people are concerned about that. The proposed arrangement this time, like other legislative amendments, they are more or less the same. Basically, we do not provide for a statutory retrospective effect for these amendments. Once the bill becomes law, we will, in accordance with the law, implement the provisions of the law. With the passage of this bill and when it becomes law, you ask whether there will be situations which covers acts which were committed before the law was passed. We will need to look at that in the light of the actual circumstances. So there's no specific retrospective effect, but as to whether or not we will judge acts committed in the past by a certain person, that would depend on the circumstances. Regarding the 5-year suspension of the person's qualification to stand for election. Once the bill is passed, if such a person had been ruled to have refused or neglect to take the oath, or had actually acted against the oath, and then we will start the 5 years from the time when such an act was committed.
In relation to remuneration and allowances during the suspension of someone's office, we will leave it to the LegCo to make a decision. The current law stipulates that the duty will the remuneration will be decided by the LegCo, and the suspension will be valid. I believe that they will take into consideration relevant factors, that is in relation to the Home Affairs Bureau. About district councillors, you talk about acts in breach of the oath that they have committed. I won't comment. I'm not in the position to comment on whether they have done any act that is in breach of the oath. However, after the law has passed, there will be relevant avenues to pursue. The oath administrator will decide whether the oath is invalid by taking into account the procedure involved. And if a person is found to have breached the oath or is deemed to not uphold the basic law and the bear allegiance, we would initiate legal proceedings against that person and bring the matter to the court for a decision or ruling to be made. On the right-hand side, the gentleman with curly hair. I'm from commercial radio. In relation to the oath-taking process of district councillors, how can the oath administrator judge whether it is done in a genuine way? If it is not deemed to be sincere and genuine, does it mean that they'll be disqualified straight away? And if some people are disqualified, will that be a lacuna? Does it mean that there will be by-elections? Is it an additional tool to disqualify pro-democratic councillors? Is that your third question? Yes. Is it an additional tool, a new tool to disqualify pro-democratic members of the district council? Well, regarding the matter of whether the oath is taken in a sincere and genuine way, there has been election petitions and judicial reviews after a person has been disqualified. We have incorporated a positive list and a negative list in the bill. These lists sets out what acts or conducts are deemed as upholding the basic law and bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, and what acts do not. This is a clear illustration of what an act is. I'd like to emphasize that we cannot cover all different scenarios. And as to whether an act constitute an act that does not uphold the basic law or bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, it depends on the actual situation. We will refer to relevant requirements in the basic law, the interpretations of the NPCSC, as well as court rulings made in previous proceedings. We try to include them all in the lists. If an act is not covered by the list, does it constitute a breach of oath? I think it depends on the actual situation. If you follow the list and if you take the oath sincerely, then you don't have to worry. If an oath taking is deemed to be invalid, if an act is deemed to be a breach, or if in the end it's decided that that person does not uphold the basic law or bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, then the person will be disqualified. You ask whether there will be a chance that a large number of district councillors would fail to meet the requirements and as a result creating a lacuna. I'm not going to comment on something that hasn't happened. All I can say is that the requirements of oath-taking is not harsh, as long as the oath is taken in a solemn, complete way, If the oath administrator thinks that it is in accordance with the law, then it will be deemed valid. If it is deemed invalid, then we will follow the procedure. If a by-election is required, then it will be done. And if there are arrangements in relation to the budget, then it will be made. In relation to whether it is a new tool targeting pro-democrats, I can say with absolute certainty that that is not the case. We're not targeting anyone. Our proposal is to provide for arrangements to meet the requirements under Article 104. We will improve relevant arrangements in relation to the oath-taking in terms of, say, legal requirements. It is not personal. But if one aspires to stand in a public election, then I do hope that you all sincerely uphold the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR and take the oath sincerely. The oath is not just about words. It's a legal responsibility. The oath itself is a solemn undertaking. A breach will result in legal responsibility.
Third row to the left, the lady in the pink mask. TMHK. Secretary, wait until you finish with your drink. Just now, you said that everything is written clearly in the positive and negative list, so I would like to refer to those two lists. For someone who commits or are inclined to damage the SAR government, how do you define that? Let's say if a certain person is rumored to use foul words against the CE, and that would already would that be detrimental to the interests of the SAR government, or are you focusing on acts involving solemn principles like the implementation of the national security law, which will only be deemed to involve overall interests? So how do you define that? Because if someone objects to the government motions or monitors what the government's proposed motions, or if certainly there will be queries and challenges to, for example, the budget. So if a district councillor were to comment on the government's budget, or objects to the government's refusal not setting up an unemployment assistance scheme, well, I think we all want to know, where is the bottom line. And could the Secretary or the PS clarify further on that? Regarding the positive list, the requirement is to support the PRC Constitution and the constitutional order of the Hong Kong SAR. If that is only confined to Basic Law Article 1, that is, recognizing that Hong Kong is an alienable part of the PRC, or is it like what some people have commented, that is, it should be actually, when one refers to supporting the PRC Constitution, it should also mean supporting the Chinese Communist Party, and anyone who loves the country and loves the Communist Party will be eligible to stand for election. And also, if it is found out, or if that should be someone who makes a false, takes a false oath, how do you define that? Are there any objective criteria to determine whether the person actually has taken the oath solemnly and sincerely. And how do you define belief objectively? What would constitute sincerely and solemnly? If that person said something on Facebook and say he supports the government, would that be deemed to be, solemn, sincerely in support of the SAR? Or will you have to look up his entire life history before you can judge? Are you worried that that such a statement without any objective basis, and you put it into the law, are you worried that it might actually invite many judicial reviews in future? Well, thank you for those three questions. First of all, regarding what is on the positive list, that it's a requirement that that the person should, safeguards the overall interests of the SAR. We should look at it globally. You refer to several scenarios, and I will not, make a judgment in respect of those different scenarios. Eventually, when it comes to a specific case or situation, we may have to rely on the court to look at all the factors before coming to an accurate decision. Regarding the safeguarding of the overall interests of Hong Kong, that's not difficult to understand. You say indiscriminately, adopting a I burn, you burn attitude. As electoral members, they have a duty to vet the ordinances and the budget. If you indiscriminately veto all these things, would that be compatible to the overall interests of Hong Kong? I don't think we need a lot of discussion to come to a decision that it is not, compatible with the requirement. We have many economic issues which have to be approved, which require LegCo to pass legislation to resolve those problems. If you object wholesale to all these government, policies and measures, which actually are beneficial to people's livelihood, well, that is obvious. If an act is not compatible to safeguarding the overall interests of Hong Kong, how can that be, construed to be safeguarding the interests of the SAR? It would depend on the situation. Sorry, speaker's not coming through. If you have a different political view, I think that is, accepted. But if you deliberately want to overturn or subvert the government, obviously that would not be tolerated. If you say, when you make criticisms against the government, I'm sure the CE is very willing to accept criticisms. Of course, we hope that everybody can, respect each others, and I think making criticism by using foul language would not be respectful. And regarding the subject of constitutional order, I think that is very clear. The SAR as an inalienable part of our country. So we are a part of the People's Republic of China, our own country. What constitutes? The Constitution is the fundamental law of our country, and it's the model for our basic law. And we have to follow the Constitution of our country. So, sorry, the speaker's not coming through. Could the reporter please wait until the secretary is finished before you ask supplementary questions? A patriot, I noticed that Mr. Shah had made some comments, and if I may quote, a patriot, he said, must respect and safeguard the fundamental system of our country. The fundamental system of our country is the socialist system. and also the constitutional order of the SAR. What is a patriot? A patriot, of course, we being a patriot, we would be patriotic to PRC. The fundamental system of the People's Republic of PRC would be the socialist system. The Constitution is the most important law of our country, safeguarding what the Constitution defined as the fundamental system of law, and safeguarding the authority of the constitutional, and that is actually a common responsibility of all the compatriots, including those in Macau and Hong Kong. It is also the basis governing the behavior of all patriots. Article 1 of the Constitution, some reporters referred to that already earlier. The PRC, implements the socialist system. The PRC is led by the Chinese Communist Party. Our characteristic is that we implement the socialist system. So it's very clear. Article 1 of our Constitution already prescribes such a requirement. If you talk about being patriotic, if you claim to be patriotic and yet you don't respect or even try to sabotage the basic characteristics of our country's system, that is a system led by the Communist Party of China, that would not be acceptable. You can't say I'm patriotic, but I don't respect the fact that it is the Chinese Communist Party which leads the country. Mr. Shah yesterday also said that in our country, which practices a social system, we can allow different political opinion, but there is a red line there. We do not allow any acts which would sabotage or damage the fundamental system of a country, or sabotage the socialist system led by the Chinese Communist Party. So other than being patriotic, of course we would need to be patriotic in a global sense. We must respect the fundamental system and will not engage in any act which will hurt or sabotage the social system with Chinese characteristics as led by the Communist Party. I don't think we need any further argument over this point.
In relation to the judgment of whether one is a false oath.
False oath.
In order to facilitate everyone's understanding, we have incorporated a positive list and a negative list in the bill. If an act is clearly included in the negative list, then it means the person does not uphold the basic law and bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, and it is a breach of the oath. We have stated clearly in the law that it is not an exhaustive list. We will take into account the actual situation before a decision is made. Thank you. On the right-hand side, the gentleman over there. I'm from Hong Kong 01. I'd like to talk about the arrangement of oath administration. It says that, it will be the CE that will be the oath administrator. So in relation to the district council, who will be the oath administrator? And you also talk about an oath being taken in a sincere and solemn way. Can the oath administrator rule that because of their conduct before the oath taking, that the oath they have taken subsequently is invalid. Well, this bill covers district councillors, legislators, as well as members of the judiciary. How come that it doesn't cover the election committee for the election of the chief executive? Is it in line? Will election arrangements and methods for the election committee be changed as a result of this patriotic requirement? Your right-hand man has just resigned. Is it because he doesn't want to take up this hot potato? What is the progress of your work in finding your next right-hand man? About the oath administrator arrangement, members of the EXCO, members of the LegCo, judges of the court at all levels, and members of the judiciary will take the oath with the chief executive as the oath administrator. We have built in a flexibility to allow the chief executive to appoint or specify a person to be the oath administrator. There are some preliminary suggestions as to who will be the oath administrator. In the end, it is the CE's decision as to who will be the oath administrators. In relation to district council, we propose that the oath administrator to be the Secretary for Home Affairs. Perhaps I will defer to the Permanent Secretary. Of course, an authorization will have to be given by the Chief Executive. Our current proposal is that for LegCo members, the administrator will be the Chief Secretary for Administration. For District Council members, it will be the Secretary for Home Affairs. Your other question. Well, the election committee is not included in this bill. District councillors as well as election committee members of the chief executive will be included in the bill. The current stage involves district councillors. We're looking into other parties that would include members of the election committee for the chief executive. In relation to the former undersecretary, we have made the announcement, and he has explained in an interview that he resigned because of health reasons. His blood pressure has reached a dangerously high level. He has received treatment, but he has not fully recovered. There is a family history of similar problems. So Mr. Andy Chan resigned from the post of undersecretary. It has nothing to do with his work. it's not the case of his preference of duties and tasks. About amending the election method, things were said yesterday. A number of academics have made comments and suggestions in relation to current election methods. We have heard them all. We have been working on improving our election arrangements. We always say that we have to ensure that our elections are open, honest and fair. Patriots ruling Hong Kong is something that we've always wanted to achieve in our elections. It's exactly because of this that we have put in place mechanisms to ensure that people who do not bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR of the PRC will not be able to become a member of the establishment. Our legislative amendment exercise this time is to make sure that these requirements are fulfilled. In the past few years, we have seen many occasions where an unpatriotic person has taken up public office, say for example advocating the we burn, you burn with us, or other illegal activities. We agree that there is room for improvement in our election system. As the director, Mr. Xia, said yesterday, we have no time to lose. This is an urgent issue. There are problems. He has listed out a number of principles. He said that we have to strictly abide by the basic law and the law. We have to plug loopholes, and at the same time we have to fully respect the rights of the public, and we have to protect the development interests of our country. We have to ensure that Hong Kong enjoys a high degree of autonomy, and at the same time we have to recognize the exercise of sovereignty by the central authorities over Hong Kong. We have to be very vigilant against radical elements that aim to overturn Hong Kong and cause turmoil and trouble to Hong Kong. Election is an important part of our system. We have to improve our election system.
So at the moment, we are working very hard to perfect our electoral system, but inevitably there is still room for further improvements. So far, we are on the one hand, doing a lot of work to constantly perfect the system. We also respect and welcome the central government. That is, if they have any such decisions, we will certainly, complement that to ensure that the principle of patriots ruling Hong Kong will be observed. Last two questions. The gentleman in the middle. Apple Daily. Secretary, some colleagues have asked you about the acts covered by the negative list. Could you explain clearly. You say you cannot comment on specific cases, but people don't know where you would draw the line. For example, on the negative list, for example, one of the negative acts is, refuses to recognize the PSC sovereignty over the SAR and commits an act which damages the overall interests of Hong Kong. Are there any specific examples that you can more clearly tell the public? On the negative list, one of such acts is to make use of the election to organize or participate in organizations that will actually, oppose the central government. Does it mean that anyone contesting election cannot make any comment that is critical of the government? And also, regarding the question of retrospective effect of these proposed amendments, on the July 30th last year, 4 district councillors, when they contested the district council election, they were disqualified. With the passage of these amendments, and according to your timetable, that is in the second quarter of 2021, does it mean that these people will automatically lose the qualification as district councillors once these amendments are approved? Dr. Cheng Chung Tai in September 2017 was accused of desecrating the national flag and was found guilty. So if within 5 years a person has committed acts which were not in support of the SAR, then according to your timetable, does it mean that he would also lose his qualification to stand for election? Finally, you said that you will follow you agree with what Mr. Ha said to perfect the electoral system in Hong Kong. Could you tell us clearly whether you will go back to the 5-step, mechanism in the past? In the past, when the government tried to, propose electoral reforms, you will follow the 5-step procedure, or is it like Professor Lau said, there is no time, and some members have already lost their seat in electoral, then we should leave it to the CPG to decide everything. I think today our press briefing is mainly on the subject of oath taking. I'll try my best to answer those questions. Regarding the negative list, indeed, we've stated categorically that we are not able to exhaust all kinds of behavior or scenarios. If we have to exhaust all kinds of examples, say whether criticizing government would be covered by the negative list, or the different ways that you can accuse or criticize the government, and I'm sure I understand you cannot exhaust all possible scenarios. But certainly the list is, not exhaustive. But the MPCSC's interpretation and decision, and also in the past, the court had many rulings concerning certain acts, and we've already tried our best to cover them all on these lists. We'll try to exhaust cover as much such acts as possible. But in the end, it would depend on the specific act itself before we can make a judgment. But what is on the list, I believe, for many of the acts that we have witnessed before, or the scenarios outlined by the MPCSC, have already been included. You specifically ask whether people will make use of the election. I think you will need to read the whole sentence. Making use of it. If somebody used the election to turn it into, a referendum, that is something else. So it's difficult to give you a categorical answer. But when we came up with this list, both the positive and the negative lists, we hope to make it clearer for people to follow. In future, should new scenarios arises, we will not rule out the possibility that we might add or delete the requirements on these lists. I believe it won't be difficult to understand what's on the list. You also refer to 4 of current district councillors who, on the 30th of July last year, that is during the election of the 7th electoral term was disqualified by the electoral officer and deemed to be not, and was disqualified because I think in the present amendment we also have a suggestion that is, if anyone has been in accordance with the law and been declared to be not have borne allegiance to the SAR, then he would not be qualified. Now, according to for these four current term district councillors, once the bill became law, in theory, if they had in the past been deemed to have not supported the SAR and bear allegiance to the SAR, then they would lose the qualification as a district councillor. So after the bill becomes law, the relevant authorities, namely the HAB, will follow up on that accordingly. You said certain members, if they had breached the law, I think for this we have to follow our overall arrangement. That is, if you have refused to take the oath before, or neglect to take the oath, or committed any acts which breaches the oath, or commit an act which is not, which is construed to be not, bearing allegiance to the SAR, then such a person will lose the qualification to stand for election or be elected. Regarding the seminar yesterday, there were questions raised regarding how we can perfect our electoral system. You refer to the 5-step mechanism now being changed to a single-step mechanism. I will not speculate or comment here. It was just a gathering of experts and academics who had a forum yesterday. I remember that the experts and the academics, they were the views made by them at that forum. So there has always been this single-step mechanism all along. It's nothing new. Even before the handover, it was there already. It was proposed by the professor. Of course, the 5-step mechanism was, proposed by the SR government, but the CPG can also implement changes to the political system through this single-step mechanism. So there is no stipulation as to which method we should proceed. I don't think a specific decision was made yesterday. I remember Mr. Ha saying yesterday that the electoral system of Hong Kong is part of Hong Kong's political system, and if we need to do it, it should be spearheaded by the CPG. Does that mean that later on there will be a one-step mechanism? And why do we need to do that? I don't think a definitive conclusion has been made yet.
Sorry, speakers off mic. The speaker is not using a microphone. What is the mechanism? Who will make the decision? Who will make the judgment whether the oath will be valid? Our current design is that it is for the Secretary for Justice to, based on the Legislative Council Ordinance or the District Council Ordinance, take action if the Secretary is of the view that a conduct in breach of the oath is committed, a legal proceeding will be initiated, and the person's public duties and functions will have to be suspended until a court ruling is made. Last question. On the right-hand side, the one with short hair.
Secretary, could you just clarify whether the new laws will be retrospective? Basically, will the councillors be disqualified on the basis of what they said or did before the law came into effect? For example, will some of the current pro-democracy district councillors who took part in their own primaries for legislative elections last year be considered as having breached their oath already? Second question, you said councillors deemed to have breached their oaths will have to be suspended from their duties pending the court's final decision. But is that a reasonable way to punish an officer before the courts find them guilty of the offense? Is that going against the principle of presumption of innocence? And thirdly, according to the amendment bill, one of the conditions considered to be a breach of the oath is that when an officer carries out acts that harm or incline towards harming the overall interests of Hong Kong. Can you define what is the overall interests of Hong Kong? Is criticizing the government against this overall interest of Hong Kong? And if you can't clearly define what that means, how do you expect people to be able to abide by their oath? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. First, regarding whether there is any retrospective arrangement for this legislative amendment, as I said, as we do our legislative amendment exercise, just like others exercise, we will not introduce any so-called retrospective effect to this exercise. And after the bill, if they are to be passed, we'll consider their behavior in accordance with the law so passed. Okay, and but we don't deny that there may be a possibility that when we have to decide on someone's behavior, whether he is upholding the basic law and bearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, we may have to take into account some of his past behavior. It depends on the actual situation by then. And as regards why they have to be suspended if such a proceedings are brought by the SJ, why the electrical or DC members, they have to be suspended of their duties and functions at once until the decision by the court becomes final. Given the importance of the roles of the electrical members and DC members, we think it would be to the best of the public interest that their duties to be suspended at once, since the proceedings are brought. Otherwise, maybe if they continue their duties, there may be other. It may be not good to the public interest, you know. And finally, regarding the negativeness. So what is how to describe the overall interest of Hong Kong? I think it's not difficult to understand what is the overall interest of Hong Kong. And I will not give every scenarios and which this is good for Hong Kong's overall public interest. This is not good for the overall interest of Hong Kong. And I think it will depend on the actual behavior by the one who and also the actual situation by them. Well, it's not good for the Hong Kong's economy. It's not good for the people living. Now, of course, this is not good to the overall interest of Hong Kong. I would say that.
好，多謝各位，多謝各位。
Thank you for coming to the press conference. Sorry, speaker is off mic. The speaker is not using a microphone. The interpreter cannot hear. The speaker is not using a microphone. We have to take into account the importance of the duties and functions of the district councillor. If a legal proceeding has been initiated and if the person continues to perform their duties, it may cause harm. But it is for the court to decide. I think it's something to do with whether there is prima facie case that the person accused has breached the oath. The court will only accept the request to initiate legal proceedings when there is enough evidence. Sorry, speakers off mic. We have already reported the situation to the LegCo. The LegCo will scrutinize the bill.
唔係，我講完啦，我意思話真係差唔多，唔好意思啊。
記者會結束，多謝各位。
This is the end of the press conference. Thank you.